move on to the third part, Zakatable Nisab, assets, gold, silver, cash, trading stock, etc. Now, this is where we get into the complexity of the matter. How do you determine Zakatable assets? Basically, that's the question. Now, first of all, let's understand the zakat calculation step-by-step process. It's very easy and very simple. There's three parts to this. Number one is you need to first identify your zakatable assets. If you know that this particular item is zakatable, that's the first check now. That's the first step. How do you identify zakatable asset? Okay, that does it fulfill the certain conditions, as we mentioned before? And does it have the nisab? How do you calculate the nisab? If you have a mixture of wealth, mixture of you have some gold, silver, cash, for example, or you may have items that are mixed with other metals, for example, then how do you identify whether zakat is compulsory or not on the item and how much? So that's the first step. First, identify your zakatable assets. Number two, step two, deduct all essential liabilities and short-term loans. So that's why I mentioned the short-term loans. So all your basic essentials, your hawaij al-asliya, all your liabilities, utility bills, for example, madrasa fees, for example, all of these things, for instance, right? Deduct all of that. And short-term loans. Short-term loans are those that which are loans which are paid within a year. I'll talk about this in detail later on. But just to understand that short-term loans are those that which are paid within a year. Why do the Sharia, why have the scholars mentioned this? I'll discuss it later. There's a separate slide on this. And then step three, once you've identified the zakatable assets, once you've deducted all of those which are not zakatable, then number three, now calculate the net zakat on the zakatable asset at the end of the lunar year. So towards the lunar year, so the simplest solution I usually give to people is that wherever your end balance is, wherever you're left with, deducting all of your liabilities that you covered within a year, wherever your end balance is, just calculate 2.5% of that and give zakat. Let's say, for example, somebody has a few £1,000. Let's say, okay, £5,000, £5,000 in his account. During the year, there's a fluctuation. £5,000 reduced to £3,000, and then sometimes then a person gains another extra £3,000, so now he's got £6,000 altogether. So £5,000 reduced to £3,000, then this increased to £6,000 and so on. The wealth fluctuates. All of a sudden, you've incurred a massive bill, for example, massive gas electric bill, for instance, right? Unexpectedly, or for example, some things that happened that were, anything that's happened, or you had to buy a car, for example, and so on, whatever. So because wealth fluctuates throughout the year, a lot of people do ask that, do I need to pay zakat on this? Do I need to calculate zakat on this? And so on and so forth. The easiest way is that look at your end balance. Wherever your end balance is at the end of the year, then you just calculate zakat on that. It's as simple. Now, what's the nisab? So this is what we look at. So gold is 87.48 grams. This is the general measurement. And it was many ulamas and scholars have done a lot of research in this, and many have attributed this to Mufti Shafi Sahib Rahmatullah Alayh. Mufti Shafi Sahib Rahmatullah Alayh, who's the father of Hazrat Mufti Taqi Usman Sahib Hafidahullah, that he's written an article, Awzan al-Shari'iyya, and in there that he has included all the model calculations of the classical measurements. So he's converted a lot of them to grams and so on. So today we have like dollars and so on. But remember, dollars, that varies between regions. So Indian tola is different from Pakistan tola, and Pakistan's tola is different from Bangladesh tolas, if they do measure, that is. So that's why. So there's a slight variation. But because we go by grams, the general measurement that we go by is grams, kilograms, and ounces and so on. So just to make it easy, we go by grams. And if you go to a jeweler, when he calculates your zakat, they go by grams. Okay, so this is not the set nisab for gold and silver in modern times, and this is equivalent to $7.50 and $52.50 of silver. So cash, you can go by gold or silver value. But I just want to mention here, though, that even though the fuqahas and the scholars have given the conception that mentioned that you go by either gold or silver value, they do outline a general principle. And this is reported from Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah alayhi, that you go by that which is anfa'u lil fuqara, that which is you go by the least nisab, by the least nisab, which is most beneficial, more productive for the poor people. And they cite an example in the books of fiqh. We don't want to go into the details of that. So Imam Bani from the set principle was that whichever is the least nisab, that which benefits the poor people, then you go by that. So which is why the value of silver is tends to be lower than compared to gold, as we know that. So which is why the general ulamas, the contemporary muftis, and the standard position today is that if you want to calculate your nisab of gold, as calculate in the nisab of your cash, then you go by the silver value. I mentioned gold or silver is because the fuqahas, the scholars mentioned that, but we go by the silver value. Mixed assets. So if you have mixed assets, for example, you got trading stocks and assets and so on, then again, go by gold or silver value, but the principle now is we go by the silver value. Now, zakatable, non-zakatable assets. So how do we determine? So this is the first step, right? Now, step one is determine. So that's this. Zakatable assets is cash, gold, silver, trading stock, personal benefits, business stock, animal stock, agricultural land. These generally tend to fall within zakatable assets. Non-zakatable assets like property, household utensils, appliances, vehicles, clothes, diamond, jewels, pearls, metals, etc. They are not zakatable. They are not zakatable unless if you use it for trading. So let me give you an example. Let's say there's a person, Zaid, for example. He has many properties, for instance. Okay, let's say, for example, Zaid, he has many cars. Okay, he has about 4 or 5 cars, for example. Okay, right? One that he uses only for his essential, the other just for luxury driving, for example. Yes. Now, one of the conditions we discussed was it has to be mal nami, productive wealth. Having about 3 or 4 extra cars just for luxury, then they don't become zakatable because they don't fulfill the condition of mal nami, unless if he's involved in trading. If he buys and sells the car, or if he sells the car, then whatever money he's gained or the profit, then he will have to give zakat on that if he fulfills all the conditions. Yes. Likewise, diamonds, jewelry, pearls, metals, etc. All of these items, they are not zakatable unless you are generating income from them. As for these, the zakatable assets, the Sharia has already considered them as malinami because you're already deriving some benefit from them. They're productive wealth, which is why they are zakatable assets. Now, this is the important slide here. How do you measure? The question is now the current nisab of cash. As I mentioned, they go by the gold or silver value. How do you determine the cash? Now, this is the most up to date. This is the most up to date calculation. I actually did this. I actually went through this calculation just 10 minutes, 15 minutes before the webinar. So this is the most up to date. So the current value of 1 gram of gold is 49 pounds. 1 gram of gold is 49 pounds 57 pence because the gold value is expensive now. So how do you determine the value of if you were to go by the nisab of gold, what's the value of the cash? Is 87.48 grams times 49.57 is 4,336 pound and 38 pence. Yes. So there are some ulamas and scholars, but it's only a minority, and I thought I'll just mention this, that there have been some articles that have been written on this, that where many ulama scholars are now leaning towards going by the gold nisab. So if somebody was to determine the nisab of their cash, go by the gold value instead. So in other words, that 4,336 pound and 38 pence will be a minimum nisab of cash for zakat to be compulsory upon you. If you do not have that, if you have 4,000 or 3,000 pounds, then zakat is not compulsory upon you. Now, what's the rationale behind this? Even though it's only a minority opinion, but what's the rationale behind this? The rationale behind this is that, you see, when we talk about that which is more beneficial more benefiting for the poor people, the question is, how do you determine that is subjective? You may say that, okay, it's more beneficial because if you determine the less nisab, then more people will give zakat, which means on the flip side, there may not be too many people receiving zakat in the first place. Otherwise, if you were to, on the other hand, if you were to set a high threshold of nisab, then that means that there are many people will be eligible for giving eligible to receiving zakat. That's one argument that they present. Another reason is because looking at the condition that we're living in, living expenses have gone so high. I mean, now this day and age, if somebody was to have 3,000 pounds or 3,000 pounds in their saving, majority of the times that where people will end up using more than half of that for the hawaji asliya. Gas bills have gone up, electricity bills have gone up, water bills have gone up, even Brexit as well now, which has not made anything better for us. All of the food prices have gone skyrocketing now. They're all increasing. The prices are increasing. Yes. For those who do shopping, we know that, even many years ago, just before Brexit, right? What was £20 worth of shopping now has become about £60 worth of shopping, or £80 worth of shopping or something, and I'm sure many of you are aware of that. So that's why some people have used this rationale, explain that if we were to set the bar of £4,000 of gold nisab, then even then people can benefit from this. Is so that people, when they have less than that, they'll be considered as owners on less than nisab, so that the money that they have, they can use that for their own personal essentials. That's the rationale that they present. Okay. Again, that's a minority opinion. However, the general fatwa is that we go by the silver value, because many of the fuqahas have said that no, this is more benefit for the fuqara, because we want people to give more. So if you go by the silver value, then the current market value of 1 gram of silver is 57 pence. So 612.36 times 57, so that's supposed to be 57, sorry, right? My mistake. 57 is 349. This is the actual calculation I've done, is 349, so 350. So 612 times 57 pence is 349. So call it 350. So right now, the current nisab of cash is 349 or 350 pounds. Yes. So if anybody has this saving in their account, then they have to give zakat on that. And the majority of the scholars have ruled the silver value. This is the most up-to-date link that many of the jewelers use to determine to give you the current value of gold and silver. So this is the link. I'm including that anyway. So once you get access to the slide, inshallah, you'll be able to access the slide, access this link. So we go by this. So this provides all the information. Now, important note about gold and silver. Now, there are a few things you need to know about gold and silver. Anything that falls under the gold and silver will be zakatable. Anything that is pure gold or majority gold, then you have to give zakat on that based on the value that's mentioned, 87.48. So even, for example, the scholars mentioned that even if somebody has gold or silver utensils, you have a gold cup or you have a silver cup, for example, okay, right? And all of them together, for example, is $7.50, for example, or 87.48. So even though in the Sharia, it is not permissible to eat from gold and silver utensils, the Prophet ﷺ forbade that. But nevertheless, if somebody was to have that, then he'll have to give zakat on that. So that's the same thing with jewelry. Jewelry that's gold and silver, we have to pay zakat on this. So all jewelry, whether used or not used, are zakatable upon reaching the required nisab. Now, I just want to mention this here because there's a slight confusion here and there's differences amongst the scholars. Now, those jewelry when women wear, is that zakatable or not? That's the question. There's differences amongst the four madhabs. According to the other schools of thought, and if I'm not mistaken, this is the position of the three schools, the Shafi'i, Malik, and Hanbali school. They say that zakat on jewelry zakat is only applicable on jewelry that if a woman does not wear it. If she was to wear jewelry, even if it's once a year, then that falls within Hawaij Asliya. It falls within her basic essentials. She does not need to give zakat on this. She doesn't give zakat on this now. Why? Is because they apply the similar analogy of clothes. For example, clothes, right? So you don't give zakat on clothes. So when you wear jewelry, even if it's once in a year, that falls under the similar ruling as clothes. And because according to all the four madhabs, there's no zakat on clothes, on your clothing, unless you're trading. So similarly, there'll be no zakat on jewelry. If that jewelry is not used, not even once within the year, then you have to pay zakat on that. This is according to the three schools of thought. Now, according to the Hanafi madhab, is that regardless of jewelry, whether it's worn or not, that does not fall within Hawaij Asliya, you have to give zakat on that now. Because the analogy that they use, that the Hanafis use, is that you can't treat like clothes like essential, which are essential needs by default. Jewelry, on the other hand, is worn out of zina, out of adornment. Adornment is something that's additional. It's not something that's fundamentally required in the Sharia, meaning it's not on a fundamental basis level, but it is a zina. Because it is a zina, that's why we have to give zakat on that. And number two, there's a supporting hadith, there's a supporting evidence that where once Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there was a woman that passed by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam saw this woman, she had bangles. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam asked her that, have you paid zakat on this? The Prophet, she said, Messenger of Allah, no, I haven't. And the Prophet said, you need to give zakat on this. It's a lengthy hadith, I'm just paraphrasing it. Rasulullah said, you need to give zakat on this. So the Hanafis use this hadith as an evidence that you have to give zakat on jewelry. So regardless of whether it's used or not, when upon reaching the Nisab level. Number 3, if someone has gold and silver, but both are below the Nisab, then they must be combined. So this is another masala you need to remember. If you have gold and silver, each of them, they have their own separate Nisab. You have, for example, 700 grams of silver, and you have 8 grams of gold. Then you do not combine. You have to give zakat on them independently. If, however, if you have a bit of gold and you have a bit of silver, both of them independently do not reach the Nisab level, but combining them both together, they reach the minimum Nisab, i.e. silver value, then you give zakat on that. So for example, let's say, for example, somebody's got $5 gold. You got $5 gold, and somebody's got, let's say, $300 silver, $300. So obviously there's no zakat on $300 silver, and there's no zakat on $5 gold. Yes. Sorry, let's go by the gram. Let's say 60 grams, sorry, 60 grams. Let's be consistent. 60 grams of gold, and you got 300 grams of silver. So both are independently below the Nisab rate. What you do now, you combine them together and work out the value of that of cash. And if that equals to £350 or more, then you have to give zakat on it now. Now you combine. If they reach equivalent to the silver value, then zakat will be calculated. So I hope that's clear. Now, mixed assets, mixed metals. Now, this is a common question that people ask and many sisters ask about. Sometimes you have gold which is mixed with other metals, right? Mixed metals. So what's the general position on that? So whenever you have jewelry or gold, that's mixed metal, there's one or two categories. Majority is either gold or silver, or majority is made up of other substances. Yes, made up of other substances. So for example, so majority, so let's say, for example, let's say 18 karat gold. 18 karat gold, for example, that's majority. I think that's about 60, no, 12, 18, I think it's about 50, 53 or 58% or something like that, okay, right? Or you have 20 karat gold, you have 22 karat gold or 24 karat gold, for example. Because they comprise majority the percentage of gold, you have to give zakat on that. Zakat on the entire gold or silver. Mawlana Shaykh Thanvi rahmatullahi actually mentions in his Beshi Zevar, he makes it very simple. He says that if gold and silver is the majority, then they'll be treated as gold and silver, and the ruling of gold and silver will now apply. However, if majority is made up of other substances, for example, 9 karat gold, 6 karat gold, for example, 6 karat gold, 8 karat gold, 9 karat gold, they clearly, the percentage of the gold and silver, or percentage of the gold is very, very small, 20%, 30%, for example. Then Mawlana Shaykh Thanvi rahmatullah says that they'll be treated as other metals, like other metals. They will not be treated as gold and silver. So which means that the laws of metals will now apply. In other words, that they will not be zakatable unless they are used for trading, for example, used in trading. Or for example, they used as currencies, for example, then they'll be zakatable. So majority is made up of other substances. So non-zakatable and will be treated as other metals. So keep that in mind and clear. So it's not the case that every type of gold that is zakatable, but you have to look at which is the majority. So I even asked somebody about what if 12 karat golds, for example, 12 karat golds, which is 50-50. Then in this case, they will say that it will not be treated as gold. It has to be majority or all. So I hope that's clear. Now, this is a case study, and I would like you to answer this. So Fatima has some jewelry and cash. She has a ring, which is 9 karat gold, and other jewelry, such as bangles and necklaces of 18 karat gold, totaling to 60 grams. She also has pure silver of 400 grams and £200 in cash. How will she calculate the zakat? I would like you to answer this question, please. Okay, right. There's something here. Yes. Okay. So these are personal zakatable assets here. So we talked about this. So we've got cash, gold, silver, trading stock, shares, receivable debt, and pension benefits. So all these are considered to be your zakatable assets. Non-deductible. Non-deductible, which means that they will be included in zakat. So just to be clear, I'm going to be using this term deductible, non-deductible. Sometimes people get confused. So deductible means that you're going to exclude them from your zakat. Non-deductible means you cannot exclude them from your zakat. You have to include them in the zakat, okay? So the non-deductible items for zakat, once they fulfill the remaining criteria of zakat, as we covered in the previous slides. Now, cash and savings, they become zakat upon reaching the minimum nisab level according to the silver value, and unlawful earnings cannot be included as zakat, but instead must be disposed of without the intention of reward. This is the thing to remember, that that they have to be disposed of, because there was a verse of the Holy Quran that we covered in the beginning, that anfiqu min tayyibati ma kasabtum, that spend from the pure wealth that you have earned. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned in the hadith, inna allaha tayyibun yuhibbu tayyib wa la yaqbalu illa tayyiba. Allah is pure, he loves purity, and he only accepts purity. Unlawful earnings cannot be you cannot calculate zakat of them. Rather, instead that you got one or two options. Either you give it to the most needy, you have to give it to the most needy, to the most destitute, without the intentional reward, whether there's a Muslim or a non-Muslim. You do not make the intentional reward, because this is not sadaqah. Yes, because if you do make the intentional reward, scholars say you become sinful, because you cannot attain reward by giving haram. Yes, by giving haram, it doesn't work like that. That's why they say without the intentional reward. On number two, what you can do, some ulamas have mentioned, dispose of, you can also use it for a non-Islamic welfare project. So if there's a non-Islamic charity welfare project, then you can even give it to them. So for example, let's say cancer research, they're collecting donation for cancer research project, for example, okay? Or they're collecting donation for like a cancer hospital, for instance, or they're collecting donations for like public roads, so they're collecting donations for building a public road, for example. So you can use unlawful wealth for that. Now, there's another question about, I'll answer this anyway, that many people ask, what if your wealth is mixed? What if your wealth is mixed? So three simple rules to remember. Number one, if it's majority halal, majority is halal, then it'll be treated as halal. Okay, sorry, let me just rephrase that. If your wealth is mixed with halal and haram, first and foremost rule is that separate them if possible. Separate them. If you can separate the halal from the haram, then dispose the haram and then give zakat on the halal if it reaches the nisab level. That's the first case. If it's not possible to separate, if the wealth is mixed so much that where it's not possible for you to differentiate, then you've got one of three cases. Either number one, if majority is halal and you know the majority is halal, then they'll all be treated as halal. Then you have to give zakat on it all. If majority is haram and you know majority is haram, then it'll be treated as haram. You don't give zakat on that, you have to dispose that off. If it's 50-50, then it's doubtful. That wealth becomes doubtful now. And you don't give zakat on doubtful wealth. Yes, on doubtful wealth. And how do you determine unlawful? How do you know something is lawful or unlawful, etc.? That's a separate discussion in of itself. This is dependent on each individual case, right? So if you're not sure of whether this money is lawful or unlawful, it's best if you inquire separately about that, okay? So this is just a general rule. So I hope that's clear. So first is try to separate if possible. Separate, then you deal with them accordingly. If you can't separate, then you go by the majority. Whichever is the majority, then the ruling goes according to that. If it's 50-50, is doubtful, you don't give zakat on that. So okay, so that's the first thing. Now, gold and silver include all forms of jewelry, gold jewelry utensils, used or unused, as I mentioned. And the wife is responsible for paying the zakat on the jewelry. The wife is responsible. The reason why is because it belongs to her. If, however, the man, he has gold or silver utensils, even though it's not permissible, he becomes responsible for giving zakat in them now. And then pension, state pension and personal stock pensions are all zakatable upon receiving the funds during the time. I have written a detailed article on this. It's on our JK and Fatah website under the article section, zakat and pension. It's about a few pages. It's quite lengthy. So for those of you who are ulamas and scholars, I would recommend you to read it all. I clarify everything in there. You can even read the conclusion. So the conclusion is that all types of pension scheme, they fall under the weak debt. We're going to talk about that. What that basically means that you don't need to pay zakat on the pension until you receive it at the end, okay? Once you've received it and it reaches to the threshold, then you give zakat on that. You don't give zakat on the previous years. You don't give zakat on the previous years, only when you receive it at the end. And there's various different types of pension. There's state pension, there's personal pension, there's work pension, and there's various different other pensions that there are out there. I talk about all of that in detail in my article. So workplace pension is similar to weak debt, in which case zakat becomes applicable when receiving the funds during retirement. Okay, so that's just a general rule to understand, because most people ask this question anyway, that when do you pay zakat? So this is the general rule. Now, shares. When you pay zakat on shares, is purchased to resell or generating sufficient profit. Now, this is general rule. This is a general understanding about shares, that sometimes people purchase shares or stocks so to generate profit, and sometimes they purchase it buying and selling. Yes. Now, both of them are zakatable, but it's mentioned here the zakatable upon the entire asset, fixed or liquid, according to the current market value. So in other words, that purchased to resell. So you purchase it in order to resell it. So even as fixed assets, if you're going to sell those articles, if you're selling the shares because with the intention of trade, because that falls now under the category of trading, you have to give zakat on that. If it's purchased to generate profit only, could you please? Okay, crypto investment. Somebody's asked a question about crypto investment. To be honest with you, I don't have much research background about cryptocurrency. I tend to usually avoid answering questions of cryptocurrency, whether it's permissible or not permissible. So I won't be able to answer that at this stage. But inshallah, if I do get time, I'll probably look into this in detail about the position about cryptocurrency, whether it's permissible or not. That's the first thing we need to establish, whether it's permissible or not permissible. If we go by the view of permissibility, which I don't know, then how do you calculate zakat on that? That's a separate discussion in itself. So I won't be able to answer that. Inshallah, in the future, I will address that. So purchase to generate profit. So zakat will pay on the annual dividend, not the fixed asset. So this is the easiest way to look at it. So fixed asset. So this is talk about the second type. The fixed asset machine during, they're not zakatable. Why? Because they fall into basic essential hawaji asliya. Current assets, cash, stock, trade, are receivable, etc. They are zakatable. One will pay zakat on the percentage of the current assets in ratio to his share value. So wherever the percentage that you accrue from the current assets in the ratio type, you will have to, of the share value, then you will have to give zakat on that. That's how you zakat. So you can't give zakat on the percentage. Let's take an example here. So Zaid purchased £1,000 worth of shares in a company of XYZ. Yes. 40% of the company's assets are covered machinery, cars, etc. 60% of the company assets are in the form of stock, trade, cash, receivable, gold. Then he'll only pay zakat on the 60%. So zakat will be on 60% of £1,000, which is £600. So 2.5% of £600 will be zakatable in addition to dividend received. In addition to the profits, only £600. So the way to ascertain the proportion of zakatable assets from non-zakatable assets of a company is to review the balance sheet at the end. So basically, the best way to do that is review all your balance document at the end. That gives you a breakdown of all the percentages. Once it gives you a breakdown of all the percentages, then you exclude fixed asset machineries. Then you look percentage of that. Then wherever that was cash or you derive profit from, then you calculate zakat according to that 2.5%. This is the simplest way. This is the generic principle. Yes, I understand that some people may ask other particular questions and so on. My advice would be, again, is consult a local Mufti on this, but this is just a general outline of how you calculate. Now, trading stocks. How do you calculate zakat on trading stocks? Now, you have three things to remember about trading stocks. Okay? So one is the intention to trade the merchandise. So when you're involved in buying and selling stocks, yes, when you're involved in buying and selling stocks, like for example, a phone, for instance, okay? Now, if you purchased it with the intention of selling, then now that phone becomes zakatable on the market value. Yes? If you just purchased it for personal usage, then it doesn't become zakatable yet until you then it becomes zakatable until you sell it. Now, the actual selling, so first is the intention. Number two, amal, the actual selling of the item purchased to resell, as I mentioned. So you have the intention to sell, and number two is the action of selling. And number three, qabd, the merchant taking possession over the stock before reselling. Now, the reason why they mentioned this is because one of the fundamental conditions of trading is, for the trading to be halal, is you have to have physical possession over the item. If you're selling an item that you do not have possession over, then that transaction is not valid. Like there's a hadith of "Wala bay'a liman la milka lahu." There's no transaction of a person who doesn't own something, right? Again, there are a lot of nuances in this, but again, that falls into the domain of Islamic finance. But just from a zakat point of view, one of the conditions is that you have to have physical control or ownership of that item. Yes, once it's in your possession, once it's under your name, then zakat laws apply now. If you're trying to sell an item that you don't have no control over, then that trading will not be permissible and zakat will not apply. So remember these two conditions: niyyah, which is the intention; number two, the actual selling; and number three is having possession over the stock. So these are all muqarana, which means they're all interconnected. Now let's go through this exercise, and I want you to determine which of these are zakatable and non-zakatable. So another case study here. So jazakallah khair for your answers. So yes, you're right. So 8 karat gold, there's no zakat on that. Yes, purchase mobile phone person use, there's no zakat on that. Purchase a property with the intention of selling. Yes, that's zakatable. An additional family car, not zakatable. And a car purchase for initially use and then sell off, then it's not zakatable until it is sold. So mashallah, most of you have answered that correctly. Now, case study. This is another case study here. An adult deposits some money into a particular bank for investment purpose in a lawful company. So he deposits some bank in the company, in a bank, and this is for lawful, in a lawful company. This is a halal company, or this is a Sharia compliant, for example. He cannot access it until after 5 years, although has control over the investment. During those years, his investment reaches the Nisab rate every year. So number one, does zakat become applicable after gaining access or before? So the first question is about that. When does he have to pay zakat? First of all, that is it zakatable? You need to decide that. And if it's zakatable, then when does he start paying it? Until once he takes full possession over it, or does he start paying it every year? If he decides to pay zakat only after accessing his wealth, must he pay zakat on the previous years as well or not? What's your response? Okay, so jazakallah khair for that, for your response. And yes, so the answer is that milkiyat is fulfilled. So in other words, he has both milkiyat as well as qabd. So because he's got control, so it is zakatable. So does he have to pay payable after gaining access or before? Now, ideally, he needs to pay every year, yeah, because he's got some kind of control. But if he wants to, if he decides to wait after 5 years until he get access to the wealth, then he can do that. That is permissible. Then that is permissible. Although it is better for him to give it every year. If he decides to wait until he gets all access of his wealth and the investment finishes, then he has to pay zakat over the previous years. So mashallah, that's good.